Me a question to lead off.
Okay, Olivia, would you ask Grandpa Jack about his nuclear experience?
What was your nuclear experience like?
What was my nuclear experience like?
Just explain it.
Well, about 1953, I was in the United States Marine Corps, and I volunteered to go to Yucca Flats, Nevada, for a nuclear device test. We were given about a week or two of preliminary stuff, first aid and whatnot, all of which would have been completely inconsequential. And we were on the day of the blast. Actually, we went out there about 4 o'clock in the morning. It was still dark, and we filed into a trench that was about 8 feet deep, and we were told we were going to be blinded when the device went off, regardless of what we did. So some of us put our hands over our eyes, and some of us looked away from where the blast was going to be, and some people looked into the wall of the trench. I seem to remember myself putting my hands over my eyes and looking east. The explosion was going to be to the south of us. And there was a countdown: 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, boom. And it was a boom. There was a blinding light, a very loud noise, a shock wave going out that shook the ground like you were on a piece of sheet metal being flipped. And then I think it was about 20 or 30 seconds later that shock wave came back, and we were bounced again. We were told we'd be blinded for about 2 minutes, and sure enough, that's what happened. And I think I've told my sons that even though I had my hands like this over my eyes and my eyes closed, that I could see the bones in my fingers. It's a very bright light. Other than that, I've been told that I told the sons that. I can't really remember that. But be that as it may, by the time we could see, the column was up 30,000 feet and still rising. And though we were 2 miles away, we could hear the column hissing and roaring. It was relatively confined. It was brown with flame orange inside. I take it that the earth was being burned. And the mushroom was starting to form, but everything was still moving up. And then they gave us a little time, and then we walked out of the trenches and marched toward ground zero. Now, this was a nuclear device, not a bomb. A device was something they could control. It was on a tower, and people controlled it by wires, as I recall, and they were back in concrete bunkhouses.
They were officers.
Pardon me?
Nothing. Go ahead.
We walked toward ground zero, and the thing that was shown was that the structures, animals, and machines that were down in the ground made it. Those that were on the ground were destroyed to varying amounts. Buildings were blown away. Signposts, some of them stayed, and those that had paper cutouts had their numbers printed on the sign. A tank, a big American tank, probably of World War II vintage, was above ground and had its turret knocked off. It was laying over there about 400 feet away. Animals that were above ground were 2 and 3 times their size, dead. Their insides explode outward. And some animals that were down in the ground were still okay, seemingly.
How close were they? How close were they?
Oh, and we turned around at probably 400 yards from ground zero. We made a big U-turn. And on the way out, we saw, we were going to go in closer, and they had monitoring tags on us and devices they held in their hand. And radiation was too high, getting too high, so that we turned around further out than what had been planned. And on the way out, we were marching along, and to the side of the road was a little kangaroo rat. They're about 6 inches high, and evidently it was on the surface or right in its burrow when the explosion went off, and it also was expanded, but not as much as the sheep had been expanded, blown up. And it was wobbling like it had had too many to drink. It probably did not make it. And then we were tested when we reached a rendezvous out there, I forget how far away, and we were tested for over the following 2 weeks or so for radiation and any symptoms of radiation disease, and none of us had it. They had played it pretty close. The big tower of dust was slowly dissipating to the east over a town in Utah called St. George. And a lot of people over there from those tests. I don't know how many tests there were in Nevada at Yucca Flats. I think several dozen, but I don't know. Both underground and above ground. But the people in St. George were hit quite hard by radiation. And the government made compensation. And that was about it. There was no, that big tower was both awesome and worrisome as a weapon, but magnificently beautiful. It was something very few of us get to see, and that's fine. I hope most people don't get to see it. The thing was the most powerful thing I have ever seen. No question about it. And colors, and the constant roar until the column really started to drip aside. What else? Can you think of any questions? No?
Why were you in the trenches in the first place? Why did they make you go down in the trenches? Like, why were you there?
Oh, because we knew so little about it. And there was talk of using, now this was 1953, it was the start of the Cold War with Russia. And both sides were threatening to use nuclear bombs. At that time there was a big push to build bomb shelters in homes. And there was the thought of using nuclear devices on the battlefield. And they wanted to find out how this would affect people. Both, of course, a direct blast, they'd be killed, but how close could they get? What could be the expected response? It was a military effort to find out more about land blast.
So
We had had the blast in the Bikini Islands in the late 40s, and but those were for sea and away from population.
So it was just a test. It was just a test?
Say that again.
It was just a test?
A test.
Oh, yes, yes. It was a test.
How close were the animals that were above ground to the to ground zero?
Well, we turned back at 200 or 400 yards, and all the animals were further than that.
Farther back. They were at
Further, but some not much more than 400 yards.
Were they all dead or were some still alive?
The only ones that were alive were down in pits that had been dug. A big van, truck van, was down in a pit and had no problem. Whereas that tank, which was further away, had been rolled and the turret had been ripped off of it.
What was the ground doing? When you were close, did you look into what the ground was doing?
Oh, yeah. You could see, as we gazed in towards ground zero, you could see a glistening. Now, we couldn't get close enough to see that up close, of course, but it very definitely, the explosion had crystallized a lot of the ground. I do not remember a big depression. It was a shallow depression.
Did you detect any heat as you during the blast, and then as you sat there, and then after you got out of your trench and moved closer to the ground zero?
Okay, they had posts up with signs on them, and in front of those signs, the signboard was blank, and there was a paper stencil in front of it. And that post could take the blast to varying extents. Where the stencil was cut out, that was burned into the sign, and that was at a number of distances. Those were pretty regular, and they might have been as much for our benefit as for the test, but I don't know.
But could you detect heat at any point?
When we were in the trench, no. The two big sensations, the three big sensations, the ground shaking, the brightness, and the loud noise.
And then, so when you saw the column, you couldn't feel any radiant heat or anything like that coming off the column?
Not that I remember. It had to be hot, but the heat might have been contained in the, whatever you'd call it, the thermals or vector that was making it go up. And it, like I say, within 2 minutes, we had our eyes open and could see, and the column was already supposedly up about 30,000 feet.